And we are recording, going live out on YouTube. This is an Agile thing. Here it is. Here's this Agile thing. Hey, everybody. My name's Matt Beam.
I'm Mike Markey.
I'm Jeff Singleton.
And I'm Scott Ambler.
And
Hey, Scott. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
No. So I saw recently you had a series of 3 posts on LinkedIn, which is how I came across you most recently. Of course, you're well known in the community, so we'll talk about that. But before that, would you like to give us sort of whatever background, introduction, sort of your, how you got here?
Yeah, definitely. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been in the Agile community pretty much from the very beginning. I was the person behind the Agile modeling methodology back in the day, and as well as the Agile data methods. So I tended to take on reasonably not so sexy topics, but critical ones. I also was very active in the unified process world. Actually developed something called the Agile Unified Process in parallel to when Craig Larman was also developing the same. But that went away, unfortunately. And then along with Mark Lyons, I developed what eventually evolved into the Discipline Agile Toolkit, which looks at business agility or enterprise agility, might be a better way of looking at it, and is non-prescriptive. Unlike the claims of some of the frameworks, DA truly was non-prescriptive. We gave options. We didn't give you we didn't tell you, thou shalt follow this best practice. We said, you need to think about these things, and here's some good options, and here's the trade-offs, so you choose wisely. And so it's really what a lot of people have been talking about. We were doing in DA for many, many years. But anyways, and it helped organizations adopt Agile and Lean and try to improve. And we always focused on improvement rather than framework adoption or methodology adoption or whatever you want to call that. But so that's and I've written a few books, still maintain several websites, agilemodeling.com and agiledata.org, as well as scottambler.com, where I blog about AI, and ambisoft.com, where I blog about just random stuff that doesn't fit on the other 3 sites. So
Nice. Yeah, I was curious. I know that you mentioned in these 3 articles that AI was a thing that you're interested in, and how obviously that's going to have a huge impact. Maybe we can get into that because I think that's fascinating. I'm not sure what to make of it. But you had the 3 scatologically themed posts on LinkedIn. Do you want to give us some background on?
Yeah, so to be blunt, I wrote 3 articles. The first one was the Agile Community Shat the Bed, which explored what's happened and why. Why we're in this position that we're in. I explored a lot of the basic historical stuff when it gets down to it, and that was motivated by based on a lot of conversations I was having with people. I mentor people. I'm available for helping people, whenever I can, and just over and over and over again, I was dealing with these really smart people who were really sort of struggling to find employment or to change the direction, and they were all suffering from basically the implosion in the Agile community. So it got me thinking about, well, how the heck did we get here? And it was mostly trends that I'd been talking about almost from the very beginning of Agile. Then the second article was titled "What Agiles Can Do After Shatting the Bed," and that was basically my advice for individuals. Here's some options that you could follow to do better, because then, frankly, the next couple of years for the Agile community is going to be pretty rough, and rightfully so. We've got to start going in a different direction, and we've got to start doing what we frankly should have been doing 20 years ago. And then finally, the third article was talking about exactly that, what I think the Agile movement needs to evolve into, and that was titled "The Future of Agile Isn't Shit." So yes, scatological theme there.
Yeah, it sounds like what I took away from it, and I've had similar conversations with people recently. It's the way that I frame it in my head is that we basically didn't, as a community, we weren't sufficiently focused on value, right? Tell me if you agree. Like we sort of got stuck on the level of process. Let's install a framework. Let's talk about what to do instead of why to do it, or how to measure the impact of it. Is it really helping? Should somebody pay for this, right? As opposed to, I think the word that you used was fluff, right? Let's stand up for 15 minutes. Let's create a backlog. But how does it really help at the enterprise level? Would that be a fair way to sort of think about it?
It was, yeah. So I think the overall theme of, serious lack of value was certainly there. And so I dove down into other issues, or more details, I should say, such as, we did focus on a lot of fluff and not a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
To take off from the fluff nuts or stuff not fluff series of conferences, which are fantastic.
Oh.
And I think and a lot of that happened because there was no real barrier to entry. There was no very little coherent, or the really popular certifications were bought, not earned. And
Hmm.
anybody
Yep.
could claim they're agile, and our customers didn't really know what they're hearing. And they believe, like, I still run into people that think hacking is agile. And that's really hard. Like, we were dealing with that nonsense in the early 2000s, and here we are, like, over 20 years later, still dealing with the same garbage because of the lack of stuff. Like, if you take a look
Yeah.
at the very beginnings of Agile, when extreme programming really sort of ruled the roost, um, it was all about stuff. It was all about, here's the skills, here's what you need to do. But sadly, it required skills, it required experience, it required you to get off your butt and learn how to do your job. And then that was not attractive to people. And the XP guys didn't run a certification scan. Meanwhile, at the very beginning, like, I was there. Scrum was dead in the water. Nobody was
Hmm.
interested in Scrum until the certification scam. And then it's like, wow, you 2-day workshop and you're a certified master. What's not to like about that? And it's brilliant marketing, absolutely
Yeah.
brilliant. Like,
I became a master in 2 days as well. It was nice.
come on, like, come on.
Yeah.
And now we're paying the price for all this.
So just to cut to the chase, it sounds like what you're saying from one of your articles is to going forward, right? If you want to actually be a player and like be credible, you need to deliver stuff that's direct, right? So you need to be on the critical path to making it better for the organization. It has to be measurable. You need to use numbers to demonstrate that that is real. And it has to be visible. The decision makers, people who with the power to make changes and pay for it, have to see that, right? And to be willing, that has to be part of their decision making. Would that be a fair summary?
Exactly, yeah. And, like, this is what the decision makers want, and this is what they've been looking for from the very beginning. But they they struggle. I was an executive for years. I've been, like, the at the very novice programmer level to the very senior executive level, and everything in between, over the years. And the executives, they want to see progress, they want to see value, they want to see something coherent that they understand. And they never saw that from the Agilists. It was like, for example, I was at a conference, an executive conference, not like the practitioner conferences most of us go to, but an executive event conference thingy. And the executives were having honest conversations about what they thought about Agile. And the one executive, it was absolutely dead on. One executive, she was basically saying, it's that, she talks to these Scrum people, and, like, these Scrum coaches that they've hired, and it's like, she said it was like talking to her 6-year-old. It was like, they have all these ideas and they're very excited about what they're doing, but then you pat them on the head and you say, yeah, that's a great idea, honey. Go away. And then, because the adults are actually making decisions. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's dead on. It absolutely dead on. And I saw that behavior from executives over and over and over again, when I was engaging in improvement efforts or transformation efforts, whatever you want to call that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And the Scrum, just like the 6-year-old, thinks they've been listened to, thinks they had a great idea, thinks they're really helping and contributing. They have no clue what mom's actually thinking about, or what the executives are actually thinking. no clue.
Yeah.
And this caught up to us.
Yeah, I think it's easy to forget that executives have to defend these decisions that they're making to invest in these roles, processes change. And if they don't have evidence to bring to on the return on that investment, how are they going to make that decision and defend it?
Yeah, and it's got to be long-term evidence, right? It's not just, oh, things have improved, or some fluff metric has gone up. It's like, are you bringing in more money? Are you bringing in more
Yeah,
revenue? Are you bringing in more profit? Whatever it is that your
cutting
organization is,
costs.
bring the citizens more. In the case of a government agency, are you actually having a real impact? And there wasn't a lot of conversation around that,
Yeah.
and there wasn't a lot of evidence. And everybody got really frustrated. You can only listen to this nonsense for so long and just bleed money out, spending money on these transformations, until you get tired of it. And this is exactly what's happened.
It's funny, the agile community I think would rate themselves highly on empathy and you know, uh sort of social cohesion, but you could almost view this as a lack of empathy for decision makers.
Well, it's a lack of knowledge. So I've got a young daughter, right? And she's a
Yeah.
teenager now. But when she was, at the 6-year-old mark, she was incredibly empathetic, right? And she is now. But having empathy at the 6-year-old level means, sharing is caring, and you're not beating each other up, and you're having a good time, and you're helping each other. Some kid falls down, you help pick them up and tell them it's going to be okay, right? All that sort of little kid empathy. And like
Yeah.
little kids were good at it, and I was really impressed with what was going on in like the lower grades when my daughter was in those grades, because they really did focus on that sort of stuff because it's important. But just because she's incredibly empathetic, like at 6 years old, she doesn't understand. She didn't understand what the heck the adults are dealing with. It still doesn't at 14.
Yeah.
Learning, getting there, but it still
Yeah.
doesn't, right? So the empathy thing is great at that level, but it's this knowledge thing that's completely missing, and this understanding of what's actually going on in these organizations. You're playing at a whole, when you're an executive, you're playing at a whole different level. And it's like the details in the trenches, you're not interested, you don't understand. Are you producing, how can I help you? That's what's going. How can I help you to meet the actual goals of the organization? That's what's really going on at the executive level. Um,
Yeah.
and how can I make my bonus? Let's be cynical about that, because that is a lot of the thinking. Uh,
Incentives matter. That's for sure. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So that's sort of I think we sort of framed the problem and the history and how we got here. Should we talk about the future?
Yeah, definitely. So, a couple, some of the suggestions that I made. The first one, we need to move beyond manifestos, right? So the
Yeah.
manifesto for agile software development at the time was great, and this to me is one of the most important artifacts in the software engineering world, certainly in my lifetime. And but it's a tad dated, and frankly, it solved the problems or it addressed the problems that we had in the late 90s.
Yeah.
It does not address today's problems. Like some of the wording is pretty outdated because we adopted it. We started doing this stuff and went beyond it. So that's okay. And it was only a manifesto for software development too. So that's something to. And so it missed some gaping things. It also missed some basic IT concepts. So there were no data people, for example, involved with writing it. And it brutally shows that. Like, if you step back and you ask who wasn't at the table, their values and their visions weren't reflected in the manifesto. And I'm not dinging the people with the manifesto. They were open. They invited a lot
Yeah.
of people. A subset of who they invited showed up, and it was what it was. But um, we really need to, declare success and move on. And I think we've declared success, and we keep declaring success, but we're not moving on. And we really do need to. And there's no possible way
Yeah.
where we're not going to write a new manifesto. So if you're waiting around for a new manifesto, um, you're never going to see one. That was a artifact of its time. We're never going to agree again around any sort of vision. I just don't see it. And people have tried, right? Like people have tried rewriting manifestos and updating it, including myself. And it's just there's just such a wide range of opinions. So we're never going to get the agreement at all, ever again. And it took them a long time. Like this is one of the things that one of the pieces of history that people really aren't aware of. It took several months to write the manifesto. They didn't bang that out that weekend. It took them several months, and eventually, it was eventually released, I guess you would say, in Software Development Magazine. I think in July of that year, in an article
Oh,
written by I think it was Jim Highsmith and Martin Fowler. Certainly Martin. I think Jim was involved too, but could be wrong about that. Don't quote me. But I'm pretty darn, and because I remember I was an editor at the time at that magazine, and I remember working through it.
hmm.
So, and you can certainly dig up an old issue of Software Development. It's 99% sure it was July. If not, it was June. So, somewhere in that time
Yeah.
frame.
Yeah, it's not like
Which
there was unanimity. It was my understanding is that there was a lot of disagreement, and at some point, the story that I've heard, or the anecdote, is like at some point people were like, "Okay, what do we agree on? Where's the
yeah,
overlap? And let's document that." And that is a starting point, right? As opposed to
exactly. It was a
achieving
classic
anything like unanimity.
that's- they were all
Yeah.
over the place at first, and then they diverged for a while, and then they converged. And there was some darn good facilitation there. Like look at the people involved. There's some pretty good facilitators in the room. Whether they would admit that or not, there was some pretty darn good facilitation people there. So
Do we need a manifesto? I guess you're saying we don't. We're not going to get one, is what I heard you saying. But do
we're
we
not we're
need
not going to
one?
get one. I don't think we need one. I don't think it would help because there's a lot of downsides to the manifesto in the early days. It really, like, the word manifesto really offended people because at the time there was the Unabomber, and so being associated with the Unabomber
Yeah.
wasn't that great of a marketing strategy. But it got the message across, right? So
Yeah.
it was great.
It
At the
doesn't help that
time.
we came up with it in the woods.
Yeah, yeah. Let's go up in the mountains and write a map.
And then send it out to
For
the
me,
world and say,
Oh,
do
okay.
it
Yeah,
this way.
you could go with the bombing metaphor, or you could go with the coming down from the mountain with the stone tablets metaphor instead, which is probably a little bit more on the nose. They weren't trying to blow up the world, but they were trying to affect the industry. There were
I think
problems in the industry.
trying to blow up the traditional project management
That is true.
strategies.
And I
Yes.
have to admit that was my what I found appealing. It was because
Yeah.
I was entrenched in the traditional project management world at the time, and it wasn't working either.
No.
So we needed something else. And it was like a revolution. I mean, for us, it was a um, we were building this up grassroots within a very strong waterfall based organization, a very PMI centric organization. And we found success starting with extreme programming, expanding into something else because we needed to get to scheduling. We adopted Scrum, and we took the 2-day class and we started using Scrum to run a project right after. But that was the first project in the 10-year history of that organization to ever come in on time and on budget when we adopted those models. So we found value in it, and we did shake up the way the organization did development, and it was very successful.
Yeah, definitely.
So
So, about a year ago, I was at a conference, and Bob Martin, one of the original writers, basically described what happened and why they wrote what they wrote. And what it was interesting because what he was saying was the primary issue was that they had observed that we were very good, the industry, and I think it's arguably still true that the industry was pretty good at doing very large software programs, like very large, like projects with dozens or even hundreds of people, that we sort of figured that out. And there's problems and a lot of unrealistic behaviors sometimes. But for the most part, we'd figured out how to coordinate that and all good sort of stuff. What those approaches for large scale software development weren't very good for small scale software development. And that's where all the PMI stuff fell apart at the time, was it really didn't reflect the small team development, which was the vast majority of software development. One of the things I did during the aughts for software development, and then for Software Development Magazine, and then for Dr. Jobs Journal, was I did research into what was going on in the software industry, and particularly in the Agile industry. And we had stats showing that, like, I can't remember what the exact numbers were, but 80, 90% of all teams were 10 people or less. So something like that. So these large scale processes, like these large team processes, were the kiss of death for the vast majority of software efforts, because this vast majority of software efforts are small team. So it was like just stuff like that. So that was what the Agile community was really addressing, was they really sort of socked it to the large team software development processes at the time, to bring a bit of reality to the conversation. So I think so that was great. It really sort of shook things up, which was a good thing. And what was interesting too was that a lot of those techniques were actually in the unified process at the time. Unfortunately, there was motivation to focus on selling tools rather than improving ways of working in that community. But I won't go there. Why?
That's interesting.
Now,
So
you mentioned unified process, and you were involved with Rational Unified Process, right? In the early days?
So I was at one point, I would argue, based on number of publications, I was the most published author in the unified process space. Of course, obviously, there's people at IBM that also wrote a big pile of stuff too, which just went into the process. But anyways, and eventually I joined IBM to help them work on unified process, and then let it die while we were there. But I did a lot of work in that space, and some of it
unfortunately, it didn't die. When we were in that waterfall world, before we went to the Agile place, there were some people who came in with a big RUP diagram. They're like, look, we can predict out the usage of all our resources out ad infinitum, and we can use these people here. And it was just like, okay, this is not helping. This is just reinforcing your crazy way of looking at the world, Mr. PMI centric project manager.
Because that was these PMI trained knobs who are using RUP to So, come on. Are there any RUP projects? Are there any RUP teams anywhere in the world today? No. Maybe. I doubt it.
I sure hope not.
Who cares? It's less than 1%. Not even
but to be fair, you were probably involved in process design for quite some time. You've been involved, whether it was started with RUP, it went in, right. Then you went to Agile and you went into other things. So the process definitions, it seems like this is an area that you're keenly involved in. Like just figure out the way.
I have vast knowledge and experience in developing and supporting and maintaining and evolving processes, for whatever that's worth. But yeah.
Well, and to be fair, I don't know if this is I don't know. Yeah. It's interesting. In the past few years, there's a whole project to product movement that has started, right? Mick Kirsten wrote a book called Project to Product. The way that it strikes me, and let me test this idea with you, Scott, is that there's still a role for, you could call it project management, but maybe looking at, I don't know, maybe it's the Cynefin lens, right? For stuff that's complicated but not complex, like if you've done it before, if you can see all the steps in it, if you know what's going to happen in each step, then project management is still a valuable and maybe a necessary way to approach stuff if there's relatively low uncertainty there, right? I mean, that's still, if you've done it before, you know what's going to happen, you can just plan the work and work the plan, right? I mean, there's still a role for project management. The point of Agile is that we've never done this before. It's not complicated, it's complex. We can't see the relationship of cause and effect. We literally don't know what's going to happen 5 steps down the road. And so that's sort of, So maybe would you agree that like working with people who have stuff, maybe that's a valuable first place to start is to say, well, what's the stuff that where the uncertainty is relatively low and you don't have to, or wouldn't agile stuff wouldn't be as appropriate, and here's the stuff where we don't have any way to predict we need to learn a bunch of stuff before we can deliver anything. Is that a valid lens to look at it through?
You're almost there.
Okay.
It's really one of context. Understand the context that you face, and there's many issues, not just how well how predictable or how well do you actually understand the domain. And which is a different. Okay, and there's multiple issues there, right? It's like how well do you think you know the domain? How well do you actually know the domain? And then what's the domain actually going to do to you when you're executing? And those are three different issues that aren't always observable at the time. But it's so yes. So you want to understand the context that you're in, and then find the right way. Find the best, most appropriate way of working for that context. So in a fairly straightforward, highly predictable environment, if you're actually in it, and that is the key question I ask is, thank you for sharing your opinion about what you think you're in. What are you actually in?
Yes.
Is my question, right? Because the people who think they're in a predictive environment are almost always wrong. So
Yeah.
and they've got a really harsh learning experience coming their way yet again, because more than likely they've made that mistake multiple times. So choosing the right way, like the right life cycle, basically is what you're talking about. Is one of the key things you want to do at the beginning of any initiative. Now, the project to product strategy, which I fully believe in, that's a reflection of the fact that your life cycle choice should reflect the reality of the life of whatever it is that you're building and maintaining and evolving. So a piece of software more than likely if you're successful, has a very, very long life cycle. Perhaps infinite, right? Like Microsoft Word, for example, they've been going strong for like 40 years. They're probably going to be going strong 40 years from now, right? So they might be an infinite product. It'll be a very long product no matter what. So, because it already has been. So your life cycle should reflect that, right? It's not a project. So, if we, building Microsoft project or Microsoft Word is not a project because it's not this short-term, start date, end date, build it and move on. It's, you got to evolve and maintain it. So that's basically the message in that book, and wonderful examples and stuff like that. So so to get back to your original observation, it's not project management that's the issue here. The real observation is you need management, you need governance, or you need appropriate management and appropriate governance. So if you have a project, you need project governance and project management. If you have a product, you need product management and product governance. I got to pronounce those words well.
Yeah.
So that's that is the critical observation, and I think because Agile in a way was a pushback against traditional project management. We're wrapped as a community. We're still wrapped up in this battle of us versus the project managers, and that was just a nonsense from day one.
Yes, that's what I'm getting at. Right.
Yeah. So
how do you help somebody who thinks they're looking at a project and you think it's a product? What kind of questions do you ask them, or how do you help them make that leap?
Well, it depends on the person. Depends
on the context.
I usually ask is how long is this thing that we're working on? Like, describe the life cycle to me of this thing that we're working on.
Is it going to end?
Is it going to end? Yes. And it's like, well, the project ends on March 31st. I didn't ask you that. I don't give a rat's ass about your fictional release date.
Yeah.
Don't care, right? Don't care where it came from. Don't care why you believe in it. It's nonsense. What happens on April 1st? Well, the software is going to be up and running in production, but that's no longer my problem. Well, it's somebody's problem. The grown-ups are concerned about that. Is there going to be updates? So questions like that. So what's actually going to happen? And then I try to have a conversation of, well, why the heck are we treating this like a project when it very clearly isn't. And that's when you run into cultural issues, right? It's, well, we only know how to fund projects here.
Yes.
Okay, I know, having a background in finance, I know that is completely wrong,
Not a good
because
reason.
it's not a good reason, and it's not even remotely true, because
Yeah.
for example, like, so say I'm dealing with somebody from the project management office. Very first thing out of my mouth is, well, okay, so is the project management office funded like a project? And of course it isn't. I've never run into that. That's just completely naive. So your organization apparently does know how to finance things, that fund things as non-projects. So why don't we go talk to the actual people with a clue and find out how we can fund this properly? But then you end up with all this. Well, we got to be able to predict the cost and the schedule, and say, not what people are interested in. They're interested in spending the money wisely, releasing things when they should be released, and so on. If you actually talk them, and to be fair to PMI, they've evolved. So just recently, they announced finally, after all this time, that the real mission of a project manager, because that's still what they're focused on, is to deliver value and to be responsible for delivering value, and to spend the money
Time.
wisely. Yeah,
It's not about delivering the project. It's about delivering value. That's
yeah.
interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are they offering any help on how to measure value yet?
I don't.
That
Yeah,
seems
so, yeah.
that seems like the big thing that I keep seeing as a deficit in most organizations, is even though they want to have a conversation about return on investment. And maybe that's driven by the adults upstairs that are just looking down with disdain at everything that everyone below them is doing. But where do they measure the return on their investment? Like, what metrics are they using? What are successful metrics for measuring that? What guidance can you give people in saying, look, if you need to be working on the value return of your product, you need to know how to measure that return. And the industry seems to be somewhat silent on how to do that. And I don't know if there's an answer there.
That's rule in nature, and
Hmm.
so say it's a lot easier for corporate America to do this, right? Because in theory, they should be investing money. They should be spending money. So measuring cost is easy. They should be getting benefit from that cost, which would be something called revenue. And then the value is, well, benefit minus cost. So I can get monetary value pretty easily. But there's also, reputational value as well, right? So there's these quantitative things which are fairly easy to measure if you choose to. There's a bunch of qualitative things which are also, you can measure, but then you're in opinion land now, and it's easy to fudge those numbers, right? But financial stuff, it's pretty straightforward. But then you've got government agencies and NGOs as well, non-government organizations, and their challenge is that they're there to make the world a better place, in theory, and so they're supposed to be helping people. So they spend money to do something that should benefit some people. But as they do that, so how do you know? How can you measure the benefit of feeding a child, or giving them malaria nets to prevent mosquitoes from biting and giving malaria? And there's like fewer people with malaria is one metric, but what's the value of fewer people with malaria? I don't know. A bunch of people lived. How
But it's
much?
not a
How
financial metric.
Yeah.
It's not a
Well, and the
financial
other
metric.
thing is, all of those are
It's metric, right? And so now
Yeah.
you've got to spin the story of, well, we saved 50,000 people this year. We think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
but that's a lagging indicator. That's a very lagging indicator. And so is most of the corporate profit, right? So we're trying to demonstrate return on investment, which can only be measured in a long-term time frame, unless you can get more frequent delivery and can demonstrate a more immediate return on that investment.
Yeah,
And it's
so
still going to lag.
terrible.
It would just lag less.
It's less. Yeah, legs less.
Okay.
Okay.
So
yeah,
if
yeah.
we're going to take,
But you've got to measure.
So
So here's where the project management folks blow it. Well, and it's, well, no, it's not the project management folks. They're in the reality that they're in. It's the governance folks and the leadership folks.
Yeah.
They're not measuring ROI on things, right? So
Yeah.
you'll have all these initiatives. They get justified up front by some fanciful
There's an
cost benefit
assumption.
thing, yeah, with some assumptions, and it's always a work of fiction. Um,
Yeah.
they build it, they release it, and then 2 or 3 years later, is anybody measuring the ROI? No, of course not. That would be absolutely foolish. First,
We kind of
it's hard.
already knew it was the right thing to do because it was an assumption.
Yeah, but no, but his point is well made. It's
They don't have the integrity
they're
to
not
measure.
measuring it.
Yeah.
And to say
there's a
that
lot
they
of-
have an out is bullshit. You can't just say they have an out, Matt.
No, I'm describing the.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to
Yeah.
to justify it. I'm saying when you start with the assumption, then it naturally sets you up to not bother because you already know. That's why you were comfortable to go with the assumption and not check it to begin with.
But this is what he was
something
talking
that
about, the
you want.
adults in the room, right? We have these adults in the room who are somewhere. Are they the ones who are making those not checking the ROI decisions, or are those the people above the not checking the ROI
I would
decisions?
think the adult would say, "Let's check that assumption."
Yeah, and it's not happening. And
Yeah.
the reason, so why, right? Why would you measure something that would validate or invalidate your assumptions? Well, if it validates your assumptions, hell yeah, I'm going to measure that. If it invalidates my assumptions, hell no. And look at the lack of measurement of the assumptions over the years. So yeah, I think it's very easily explainable. So and that
Motivated
to me is
reasoning.
a lack of governance.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense.
Okay, so since Agile is generally playing down in the weeds where they're doing the work, it sounds like the problem of not checking return, the not really putting the right work into the pipeline, that's a problem above where Agile is generally playing.
And that's yes, and that's because the Agilists chose not to play higher up level. Some did, some didn't, right? And most didn't, but some did because for a couple of things. First, Agile does come from the software world for the most part, but second, it requires skill and work. You got to work your way up the food chain, which wasn't really happening. You got to stick around at an organization, or at least move, make your move to get your promotion into the next organization, bounce around like that and work your way to the top. Bringing Agile along with you, or bringing better ways of working, thinking along with you along the way. So it didn't happen. And it also didn't help that most Agilists couldn't speak the language of the people they were trying to help, right? It was like the 6-year-old giving mommy a word of advice. It's like, yeah, that's a great idea. Go play. Go build some stuff. And this is what happened.
Yeah.
Well, as you evolve up that system, your focus has to change. Your focus goes from the focus on customer value, which is very much immediate to the people down in the trenches. And Agile helped bring that to the fore. It said, here, you're going to have a customer right here that you can talk to make sure you're satisfying their needs. That was the intent. But as we got further and further up the food chain, as you get more close to the adults, they're not focused on customer value. They're focused on share value. They're focused on the value of the organization.
Well,
our friend Marcelo Lopez is always saying their job is the name on the door. It's the sign outside. It's the corporate identity.
It depends. So they're focused on a lot of things, right? The good executives are focused on customers, but they're focused on longer term visions. They're thinking about where the organization's going. How can we get it there? Like, what are the long term needs of my customers? How can we satisfy them? From a strategy point of view. They're worried about regulatory compliance. They're worried about where the regulations are going. They're worried about what their competitors are doing. They're worried about, I hope long term. They're doing long term thinking. How are we building an environment that's going to going to be sustainable, like a corporate environment or a government environment that's going to be sustainable over time. So they're worried. They're worried about a lot of things, not just what's the daily request from some customer,
Mhm.
right? Like that's
Yeah.
one of many things they might be concerned about, and it's probably not their number one concern, right?
Jeff, you've been
So
very quiet. Did you have something you wanted to jump in here with?
Go ahead, Scott. I'll jump in
go
after.
ahead.
So no, I think first and foremost, I think that this is kind of the conversation that we had last week with respect to working in the mid to upstream levels and having those conversations and the necessity of that. But you have to counterbalance historically the origins of what we are calling Agile coming out of the software environment. And frankly, software folks have rarely, I'm not going to say never, but rarely had the skills, I'll go on and say it, of speaking in the language of business. And so, they were hidden in the corner developing software, and that has led to this, this disconnect between executive management and software development. Maybe CIOs were supposed to help bridge that gap, but it's never really truly been bridged. And so having that conversation about delivering value, business value, when you're busy heads down developing software, that's not where they come from. And so unless they were having that conversation long before, then it was kind of unrealistic. That's my suggestion. It was kind of unrealistic that they were going to suddenly start, oh, let's have a conversation with middle management or upper management when they've been busy relegated to, the dark closet of developing software and just churn this stuff out. So Agile as a software development approach has graduated, I guess, to more business agility. And I guess when I think about this, I think just that disconnect probably still exists. Maybe the next generation of whatever the heck we're doing, whether you want to call it Agile or whatever, does include the conversations down at the lower level and speaking in terms of business value. But I don't know. I mean, we talked to Jim Benson a couple of weeks ago about that, the same sort of thing. What's the next generation? And it really is going to be about more focus on business value. But, I'm hesitant to bash where we've been just because that was the situation we were in. So, all right, fine. We are where we are. Let's move forward. But
Yeah. It's like they've been relegated to the kids' table, to go back to Scott's original metaphor,
Yeah.
right? And the parents are at the grown-ups table saying, "That's nice, honey. Go back to the kids' table and play." When do they graduate to the adult table? How do we get them to the adult table? How do we get the adults to? Because there's still an us and them. As much as we're trying to say that we don't like us and them, right? The senior leadership is still all right. Yeah, it doesn't matter who you are as you're coming up through the ranks. You are a child to them until you get to their level of maturity. You're not the grizzled elder sitting at the table doling out instruction and wisdom without benefit of context, as it were.
Well, and a lot of it, when do you have responsibility, right? How do you, think about raising your own children? Like, so it's, they're sitting, the 6-year-olds are sitting at the table, fine. But as your children get older, what do? You start giving them more responsibility. Can you handle this? Can you handle walking home from school by yourself? Can you handle buying your own lunch at school, right? Like and making reasonably good choices. So you dole out more and more responsibility and see if they can handle it, and then you start raising the bar as you go. And what happens is when we're satisfied with being a software developer and being a member of a team, that's great. If you want to do that, great. That's a wonderful career choice. I fully get it. But don't but you're choosing to stay at the kids table because frankly being at the kids table is pretty good. So fine.
That's where the fun happens.
Yeah.
It's where the fun happens. Yeah. I think all of us would probably wish we could go back to being children again and not having all the responsibilities and all that good sort of stuff, right? So
it'd be nice.
Yeah, it would be nice. But why not?
The one place where this metaphor breaks down though is our children. We don't lose children as they get older. Like we don't start out with a dozen children and then in a few years a couple of them advance to the next level and then but the rest die. Right. So it's not right.
They used to.
Yeah, but it's not. So
mortality rates have improved.
The thing about this is as they come up through the corporate level and they're taught this is your next level of responsibility, demonstrate that you can operate at this level. What they're being taught is to operate the way things have been all along. And if they're carrying some agile kernel with them as they go up, the group around them isn't demonstrating that kernel. They aren't carrying that light. So they have to be, I'm the new person at the table. I've got this stuff from down here that I'd like to share. And it's like that's the conversation that they have at the kids' table. We don't have that conversation up here and it gets snuffed out.
But that's sort of how progress happens. Right? It's a bit morbid, but there's a saying in science, right? The science advances one funeral at a time, right? As people learn and grow, the new ideas come from the bottom, and then the people at the top age out who are not willing to do that. And that's sort of the overall macro level of how this stuff changes. Would that be? Yeah. Would that be fair? Yeah.
Scott was about to say something.
Sorry, yeah. Scott. Go ahead.
I think it's an issue though. The kids need to step up, right? Yeah. And we don't see that for the most part in the Agile community, right? And I think some of it is to Jeff's point, where we come from when we have this culture of bashing management, and we've done that on this call, nicely, but still we've bashed management. Then we whine about why aren't we at the management table? Because you bash management constantly, and you don't even know what you're bashing, right? You don't even know. So, and it's like, so you're not taking a step to go to the next round. Like the next level would be to be a lead, like a real team lead, not a scrum master, but like a real team lead who has some responsibilities, who can actually get things done. Like, what the scrum master folks talk about, but you actually got to do it. Right. And all that other stuff that you don't, the extra useless bureaucracy you don't like talking about because it's not so useless after all. You need to have coherent discussions about governance. When governance is a swear word for most Agilists, it's like, thanks, go play with.
Thanks, honey.
Yeah, thanks, honey. Thanks for sharing your opinion. But you know what? Mom and dad are keeping an eye on you. Mom and dad are controlling your allowance and keeping an eye on how you're spending it. Right.
We're responsible for what happens. So we need to.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair to say though that most Agilist governance is a dirty word. I think that there are definitely people who railed against over governance, but if you're in a regulated environment, you're not avoiding governance no matter how hard you try, no matter what process you hang on your door. You are subject to governance. Right? There are rules of the road. There are table stakes to exist. So a pragmatic approach would say, maybe, yes, we still need governance, but maybe we don't need it at that level. Most governance came into play in a response to something, and then it stayed. Somebody made a mistake. Somebody fixed the mistake by making a rule that made it impossible to ever make that mistake again. And everyone from that point forward is subject to that rule, plus the next rule, plus the next rule, plus all the other rules. And it gets to a point where the tome of governance is so large and so overbearing that it's lost its purpose.
Or you
And-
could say effective governance involves a process to update the rules and get rid of the ones that are no longer effective.
Sure would.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you're still playing by the old game though, right? So earlier we were talking about how we need new ideas, and the younger generation brings it up to the older and all this stuff. So good governance is really about motivation and enablement. I should motivate you to do the right thing, whatever the right thing happens to be, and I should enable you. I should make it as easy as possible for you to do the right thing, and if that's through automation or through better processes, and by implication, make it as hard as possible to do the wrong thing, right? So have guardrails and maybe spikes on the guardrails, just to if you really want to be mean about it, and so that's what it's. And the problem is traditional governance is more about policing than it is about effective governance. So the point is that we need to so the Agile community should have had a more coherent discussion about governance, and they didn't really. Yes, we did in the DA community, but I don't really see that coming out of Scrum at all. Even though they do have some very interesting governance things in Scrum, but do they talk about it in terms of governance? Because it also gets back to you need to be able to speak the language of the people you're trying to help. So it's like, well, we don't have any governance at all, but we do have definitions of done. Okay, that's a quality gate. So fair enough, right? So we need to be able to communicate in the old ways, in the old terms, done to explain what the heck we're doing and why it's important why we're doing it. So we used to talk in terms of risk. We deal with we don't talk in terms of artifacts. We talk in terms of risk in DA. So it's like, what risks are you mitigating? What risks are you addressing by doing this sort of a thing or by doing that sort of a thing? So then what happens is now, because we could map the various options to addressing certain types of risk, we could then have coherent discussions with the governance people and organizations who might not be the most flexible people in the world, and who frankly deal with people trying to do end runs around them all the time, right? So they're smart, they know this is going on, so they're a bit jaded, but we would have risk-based discussions with them and say, well, what risks, and first of all, what risks are you addressing by inflicting this bureaucracy on these people? Okay, well, good. Those are valid risks, I guess, due to past history or regulations or whatever's going on. Well, here's how we could still address those risks in different ways, and in more effective ways, and provable ways, and measurable ways. And here's how you do it. So we would have a coherent discussion about this. Now, whether or not they actually wanted to change, and you're still in that land, but at least we could give them a path, and we could say, here are better options, Mr. or Mrs. Governance person. Would you like to improve your way of working? And if so, we can help you. And it's not this, I don't like only having a $5 a week allowance whine because I want to buy a $6 toy argument you had with your kid. It's the, here's why, here's a coherent reason why we need $6, because having that toy addresses this risk of me whining when we're in the car going to grandma's and right?
It's a real risk.
Oh, I'm going to spend $6. Yeah. Shut you up. Yeah.
Done and done. So we're coming up on the end of
$600 for another build machine.
Yeah, that's a separate conversation. We're coming up on the end of the time box. This has been awesome, Scott. Before we drop, is there anything else you want to make sure you mention? Anything you want to plug? Any upcoming events?
Yeah, I think the critical thing is for people to realize Agile does have a good future. We're going to have a rough time for the next couple of years, and rightfully so. We dug a pretty deep hole, and we're going to have to live with it for a few years. But I think people are going to have to work hard. I think we need to learn our craft, and we need to move away from the fluffy stuff. Like, fluffy stuff's still important, but if you don't have the stuff as well, it's not going to get the job done. And I'm doing it. I'm actively working. I'm finishing up a master's degree in AI right now. But once I'm through this, I'm at the end hump. But once I'm through that, I'm going to refocus on evolving the Agile modeling and the Agile data material, sharing as much stuff as I possibly can, and of course applying it to customers and all that good stuff. too. But
That's right. We didn't get to AI in this one. There was plenty of stuff to talk about.
Okay.
Maybe in the future you could come back. We could talk about that because it's
yeah,
looming.
I would love to. I'm actually
Yeah.
working on my thesis is on the relationship of between AI and data quality, and amazingly, there's not a lot of data on that. The cobbler's children always seem to go without shoes, and
Yeah.
Definitely not a lot of quality on that. It is a collective of opinion.
Yeah,
A vast trove.
I think the fundamental problem is that people inherently know you need better data quality to get better AI, and they just fix the problem. They don't bother to study it. They don't bother to run the numbers on it. It's just like we need to clean this mess up. They clean the mess up and they move on. I think that would pretty much seems to explain the very serious lack of data on data quality issues. So
Is it fair to say high level though? Is it fair to say that there's risk in the oncoming AI for people or organizations that are not willing to change, but there's also a lot of opportunity there as well? It's not all downside. Would that be fair?
it's definitely not all downside. I think there's more downside if you don't come up to speed on this and you don't start working with it. But it'll be one of those things where it's becoming table stakes. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, and LLMs, large language models, reasonably dead end technology. I appreciate they're phenomenally popular right now, and ChatGPT, rah rah rah. I
LLMs
think
are a dead end technology.
Well, if
I want to
LLMs
follow
are,
up
see
on that
now we
next time.
definitely have to have them back because if LLMs are the
Absolutely.
dead end, where's the live end?
That's a
So-
fascinating statement.
And
Well, that-
and
Scott,
oh,
please
look at
come
the
back
time.
and talk to us about
We
that.
can't
Yeah,
we
that's
can't
the fundamental
possibly delve
question.
into that now.
That's
Awesome.
actually a very serious question that the AI community is struggling with right now. It's
100%.
LLMs have a place just like everywhere else, but nowhere near the hype. Nowhere near the hype of it's going to become a super intelligence and terminate us all. No, not a chance.
Awesome.
I think an
Wrong.
LLM would, just you feed it enough bad information, it'll kill you.
Well,
Just
it's
wow.
intelligence to do it, yeah.
it'll just easily kill you as give you a term paper.
But it
It'll
wouldn't
do
want
either
to
one.
do
It
it.
doesn't.
If it's not alive, why would it have any wants or teleology or goals? Anyway,
Well, no.
we're bleeding.
Well,
We're bleeding into the next segment. This has
Yeah.
definitely been an Agile thing. This has been awesome, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, my name's Matt Beam.
I'm Mike Markey,
I'm Jeff Singleton.
and Scott
and
Ambler.
this has been Scott Ambler.
Yes.
Good talking to you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
And Jeff, do you want to give the line?
Sure, and like and subscribe.
Oh, yes, that's right. We're on YouTube. Okay. See everybody next week. Thank you so much.